last month we were in chapter 6, talking about what is praise. And so I'm going to just do a couple of review questions, and then we're going to jump into this month. So we talked last month about how praise is not a feeling. Praise requires something. Do we remember what that something is? It starts with the letter E.
It's an expression.
Yes, an expression. It was one of the definitions of praise. So it requires us to express something. So something has to be expressed in order for it to be considered praise. Does anybody remember one of the reasons, if not all three, of why we praise? Why do we praise?
Because of who he is.
Mm-hmm.
What he's done.
Uh-huh. And what he's going to do. Yes, absolutely. Okay, and then one of the benefits of praise. Does anybody remember that? We talked just kind of briefly about those, but that was one of the questions at the very end.
Benefits.
One of the benefits.
It positions us to enter into the promises of God.
Yep, that's it. That was one of them. There were like 7 or 8, I think. Okay, so what we're going to talk about now is this book. One of the reasons that I love this book is because he talks about the tabernacle of Moses. He said if that was God's original pattern for us, then it makes sense that we go back and look at the pattern. And so one of the things that he talks about in chapter 8 is entering in. How do we enter? So I'm going to read just a little bit, an excerpt from the book, because he says it so well. There's no point in me trying to reword it. He says, what can I learn from studying the tabernacle? If I were an Israelite in Moses' day, the first thing I might notice is that there are distinct sections of the tabernacle. From the outside, I can see the courts. That is the uncovered outdoor region of the tabernacle, like a yard surrounded by a fence of silver pillars and linen curtains. A lot of activity is going on in the courts, and priests are moving among the people, inspecting offerings, washing, and performing sacrifices. I can hear the sounds of people talking, weeping, praying, and praising. I can hear goats and lambs bleating, oxen lowing, and birds cooing, and I hear their death gargle as they are slain at the altar. I can smell the stink of animals, blood, burned flesh. Because I am outside, I am also exposed to the elements. When it is sunny and hot, I wait my turn in the heat. When it is raining, I am wet. When the wind bites, I am cold, but I wait my turn. It is a part of my worship. I never come empty-handed. Sometimes I bring a tithe, sometimes an offering, sometimes a sacrifice to represent my gratefulness for a new child, and sometimes I lead an animal to death, knowing I am the one who deserves it. These are the sounds, the smells, and the feel of sin and sacrifice, and they work on my heart as I approach the altar of God. It talks about in Psalms 100, verse 4, we all know this verse, we say it quite often, enter into his gates with what? Thanksgiving, and enter into his courts with praise. And so in this chapter, he begins to ask, what is the gate? Or maybe we should say, who is the gate? In John 10, verse 9, Jesus says, I am the gate. Whoever enters through me will be saved. So this morning or this afternoon, this evening, the gate is Jesus. We know that the New Testament came and that he became the gate for us. And he talks about in this chapter, sometimes we get frustrated when we're in worship because we want to take the people straight to the courts. But they have to get through the gate first. Yeah. And so that is why when we sing songs about Jesus. We sing songs to Jesus. We sing songs describing him. Whenever the worship leaders get ready to pick songs, sometimes we can theme the songs according to the theme, but most times all Pastor Jay says is choose songs that glorify Jesus. Because that's what he realizes. He knows that if we can lift up Jesus, then people are going to enter into the gates. But we can't take people straight to the courts. We can't bypass the gate. And then he talks about how there's a latch to the gate. Like you can't get through a gate. Just, you can't walk through it. There's a latch to the gate, and he says that the latch, if you look at Psalms 100 verse 4 in the Message translation, it says, enter with the password, thank you. That's our access into this gate. When he says enter his gates with thanksgiving, like it's literally our gratitude that gets us into the gates. And he said there is an attitude of access. We have to have the right attitude. We have to posture ourselves accordingly. And so the way that we lead others to the courts is by leading them to Jesus. So I want you to think about that as we're entering in. I'm going to go ahead to chapter 9 because there's a lot of chapters and I'm trying to condense it so that we can try to cover the book within the year. And so once we get into the gate, the very next thing that we see is the altar. And I'm going to take a picture of this. He gives a diagram and shows like what the Moses' temple looked like. So I'll take a picture and I'll send that to you guys. But once we get into the gate, the very first thing that we see is the altar. And the altar is the place of sacrifice. The excerpt that I just read from the book, imagine the smell, imagine the sounds, imagine the sight. Like we want to think, I think sometimes that worship is like cute, but it's not. Worship is ugly. Like worship, like, can you imagine it stunk? Like, can you imagine what it sound like? He said the gargling of the animals as they're dying, they're taking their last breath because they're being sacrificed. Like that's not cute. And so when we think about worship, worship has to have an altar. We can't have worship without having an altar. And sacrifice entails death. Death to our will, death to our way, death to our emotions, death to our desires. And he talks about, in this particular chapter, one of the main things he talks about is submission, making sure that we are fully and completely submitted. That worship is a matter of submission. It's a matter of lordship. And he asks, whose kingdom are you living in? Whose rules are you following? It's all about his kingdom and his ways. So when we get ready to worship, we can't worship without getting to the altar. And we can't get to the altar without having a sacrifice. He said, submission leads to obedience, and obedience leads to presence. And you can't show up at the altar empty-handed. He talks about the greatest example. He said the greatest worship leader who ever lived was Jesus. And he said Jesus is a prime example because he didn't show up empty-handed. Jesus actually showed up and he was the sacrifice. And he says that, if Jesus is our prime example of not just bringing an offering, but being the offering, then that's how we have to be. In addition to our tithes, in addition to our offering, in addition to our gifts, we bring ourselves, right? We lay ourselves on the altar. And so, as we're worshiping, I just want us to, just remember we can't get to the courts until we get through the gate. And then once we get through the gate, the very first thing that we're going to see is the altar. And the altar requires death. It requires death to something. And the greatest way that we can lead people to the courts is through Jesus. So just kind of, meditate on those things, think on those things. And, we just want to continue to grow and evolve in worship. We want to continue to keep our hearts set and focused on him.